And he was buying stuff. I mean, you think he was like a kid in a candy counter, and going to Home Depot and buying salts. He bought a brand new shotgun. He said, "Want you to?" I said, "Okay, I'll come up there." Bought a brand new shotgun. Got down to the store and bought a brand new shotgun. 3 chickens were in his yard. He said, "I want you to kill those chickens." Brand new shotgun to kill 3 chickens. November 17th, 2009.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna have to get off of here about 6:45.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'll have to watch your YouTube video tonight.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Have you been getting the notes that I've been sending? I've been sending my notes every week.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I have. Yep. We need to get started. So. All right. We're talking about this week the library, the preacher's library, and also we're going to talk about not everything on the computer, but that you can do on your computer, but the resources that you can use on your computer too. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15, it says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." And we need to, I think the American Standard has handling aright the word of God. And that's what we're talking about then, being able to handle aright, making sure we've got the right interpretation and also the exegesis of a passage. No book is good until it is used or it is read. Now, I have books in my library that I've used seldom, some I use regularly. But every workman needs tools, a carpenter. Now, when you think about a carpenter, what tools does he need? He needs a saw, he needs a hammer, he needs a screwdriver, he needs all of those things. Now, you can get, instead of using a screwdriver, you can use a drill motor. They have the cordless drill motors. You can do all of that. Same thing with the saw. You got the old hand saw. They got the circular saw, table saw, radial arm saw, all of those things that they can use. So, there are some basic tools, and then you can get past those basic tools. Same thing with a chef, pots and pans, and then you can get into more, how you cut things up and how you cook things. Instead of using a frying pan, you use a wok. I don't know. All of that kind of stuff you can use. There is also the mechanic. To be able to work on cars now, you've got to have the proper tools. So if not the proper tools, it's a lot of labor involved in it. And then also a computer programmer got to have the proper tools also to work with. And a preacher got to have the proper tools. Without those proper tools, then he's not as good as what he needs to be. So we need to have then a good library, a good basic library, and then build from there. So we're going to talk about some books. We're going to talk about different kinds of books and that type of thing in there. Then we're going to get into some computer programs. If we get through, then we're going to talk about some sermon outlines and how we need to do some sermon outlines and that type of thing. So let's talk first of all about the basis of a good library. First of all, you need a good Bible. And I'm talking about a good Bible. One that will take the wear and tear that you're going to use. Good Bibles now are very expensive, $200-300. That's up to you. I've got Bibles that are in that range. And I don't mind spending it because that's my tools. You need also, when you're talking about that, you need some different translations. You need some different versions of the Bible. I, of course, use the King James. That's my basic New King James, American Standard, and then from there I go to other places, some others. I've got the ESV. I've got some others. Good News, NIV, American Standard, and then the the New American Standard. I've got that too. There were some of those cotton patch versions. I'm not sure if I have a complete one of those or not, but I've got that. So when you talk about that, then when I'm talking about translations also, you can get into the Greek and the Hebrew, and there are interlinears. Now, interlinear is where they have the English and the Greek or the Hebrew right underneath it. So I recommend all of those. And then there's some other books on how we got our Bible. You need to understand the development of the whole way that we've got our Bibles. I know that's a class in and of itself, but you need to have books and you need to know, because this will help you then understand the basis behind all the modern speech translations. This will help you, and you need to know why modern speech translations are not as good as some of the other translations. People are going to ask you that question. They may ask you, what is a good version of the Bible? If you go to a Bible bookstore, they're going to sell you what's popular, not necessarily the best that you can get out there, the best translation. They have no idea. They're just people right off the street, and they have no idea. So how we got our Bibles, you need to understand then the Old Testament and the New Testament, how that developed. The Dead Sea Scrolls, there's books on that. That is also very important on how we got our Bible. It really reinforces. The Dead Sea Scrolls reinforced. It was 1947 when they discovered these scrolls, and it reinforced our Old Testament to the nth degree. I mean, we've got the Old Testament without any problems. New Testament, it helped with that too, and understanding that. And I talked about other versions there. You need to understand the idea, and that's why prefaces are so important in studying and reading about Bibles, because some people, when they translated them, think of thought translations or thought revelation, that the Holy Spirit just gave them a thought, and then they wrote those things. Some it's an idea, and there's very little difference, but there is some difference. But you've got to understand there are some who believe in the plenary, verbal inspiration of the Bible. And that's what you need to start with. And you need to stay away also, and I have some copies of that, the one-man translations. I don't care if it's put out by our brethren or not. But be careful of them. Use them as a study guide. Use them as a commentary, but don't put your weight on them or in them either. All right? So you're going to start with a good Bible. Now, a good Bible, there are good Bibles out there. There's the Open Bible Study. There's, that's the name of it, Riley Study Bible. You have Thompson Chain Reference, an old one that was used by a lot of members of the church as a Dickson, Dickson. They're out of print. They're very expensive if you find one. They were a good Bible because they gave you other, they had a dictionary in the front. They had introductions to the books. They had an outline of the book. Thompson Chain Reference has that. You just got to know where to find them. The Thompson Chain Reference now has archaeology, partial. There is a book that, a hardcover book that I have that is put out by the same people on archaeology. So there's some benefits but you need to know how to use your study Bible. You need to know, because there's certain information in there that will help you in developing a sermon. So there's your good Bibles. Then start with a good Bible. Have it in a prominent place on your desk so that you can use it regularly, like every day. All right. Then next, I would have dictionaries, atlases, and concordance. Really, I may have concordance, dictionary, and atlases in that order if I was going there. Concordance, I would have Strong's Concordance. Another good one is Young's. Crudence is also one. I have all of those. The best that I most rely on is Strong's. And the reason I have that and use that is because Strong has gone through there and numbered every word in your Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. And I forget which one is italicized, but when you look at a Strong's Concordance, you can see, and then in the back of it, it has a dictionary, and that's one thing I like. Now, so many of the works that we're looking at and we're going to go, you don't have to be a Greek scholar. If you can find that word, that number that corresponds to that word, you can look that word up and you can see that and study that. That's the way I do it. It's a very good way. So maybe a lazy man's way of doing it. Instead of knowing the Greek like I should, I do it that way. And I've never had Hebrew. But I would have one is Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words. It is in a volume about yay thick. It used to be in 6 volumes, I think. And I've seen that once or twice in my preaching career. And one time I should have bought it, that it was for sale. But Vine's now, we'll get into this later too, is public domain. And that means that you can download it for free. Logos then will sell it to you for $19.95 if you want there. Then there's also another dictionary, it's Thayer's, that you hear people quote quite a bit. The one that I have is not correspondent with Strong's numbers, but they have correspondence with Strong's numbers now. Then concordance will help you find words. Now you've got to, or verses, you've got to know a word in that verse, and it's got to be one of the prominent words. You can look up the and a and of and all of that, but that won't help you as much. You need like grace or mercy or savior. And you got to spell it like they spell it too. Saves, love. You might want to look up charity and all of that. So a concordance will help you find where a word is. In this, and talking about this, in one of my Bible programs, I have an Englishman's Greek Concordance. And I have a hard copy of this, but I have one on my Bible program, and I use it because it will tell me specifically where that Greek word is used. And so I like it, and I use it. Not everybody will, but there's that. There's then a concordance dictionaries. Now, there's lots of dictionaries. Smith, S-M-I-T-H, has a dictionary, and I have an old copy. As a matter of fact, it's so old, it's in a leather-bound copy. And I forgot where I found that. I think I can remember, but anyway, Smith's Bible Dictionary. There's other Bible dictionaries. Unger's has a Bible dictionary that's very good in several areas. There's some others that are they're small books. I say small because they're not tall. They're kind of thick. And they give you a good introduction to some of the books too. And they are valuable books. Let's see what else. Oh, yes, on the atlases in this too. I like to know, and I've done this for years. If I was going someplace, I'd open up a Bible, or not a Bible atlas, but an atlas of the United States, and I would find out where we're going. This is back before Google Maps. But I would plot my way, and I would see, okay, this is where that place is. Or maybe one of my friends moved to an area, and I would then open up my atlas and then find out exactly where they were and where they are. And so I'd like to do that. Same thing with Bible. When we're talking about the Sea of Galilee, do you know where the Sea of Galilee is? Do you know where the Dead Sea is? Do you know where the Jordan River is? Do you know the elevation of the Jordan River, how it starts up high and comes down low? What do you know about the Dead Sea? What do you know about the Sea of Galilee? Here are where Peter, James, and John were fishermen. Why did storms come up so quickly on the Sea of Galilee? And the Jordan River, how long it is from point A to point B, from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea, and why it's so windy. And if it was just straight, then it would be nothing but waterfall. And so, because of the elevation difference. Then you go to the Dead Sea. What do you know about the Dead Sea? Why is it called the Dead Sea? Because there's nothing alive in the Dead Sea. It's full of salt. Where did it come from? Where did the salt come from? That's another area of speculation. But you can go to the book of Genesis and Sodom and Gomorrah when they were destroyed. It's in that area. So it could be from there. But anyway, when we talk about Dan to Beersheba, where are we talking about? When we're talking about the Philistines and the 5 lords of the Philistines, where are they? When you talk about the river of Egypt, and that's not the Nile, but when you talk about the river of Egypt, do you know where it's at? When you talk about the Euphrates and the Tigris, do you know where they are? Do you know about the Fertile Crescent? These things will help you with a Bible atlas. When Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 was told to leave the land of his birth, the land of his nativity, and go over then to the land of Canaan, that promised land. Do you know which way that he traveled? And it's called the Fertile Crescent. Well, why did he travel that Fertile Crescent? Because that's a longer way than straight across. And why didn't he come straight across? Well, you need to know those things. You need to be able to explain those things. It helps you in your preaching. Make that more vivid and get the idea of what you're talking about there. So I like Bible atlases. Now, the Bible atlas that I have is out of print. I had a Baker's Bible Atlas. It was a good one. I don't know why they quit doing it, but there are others out there. So there are then, when I walk into my library, there's my Bible's then dictionaries, atlases, and concordance, and where they are so I can have easy access. Now, when I set up my library, I want the Bibles that I use, or did I say Bibles? The books that I use most, the closest to me. I worked at the post office, and they had little cubby holes set up that you put the mail into. The ones you used the most were set at right in front of you. And then as you got out, then further away from that, then the ones that were less used. So that's the way I do with my my library. I think that's the way any good mechanic would do it. He'd have the tools that he uses the most, or the carpenter would use the tools that he uses the most, have them closest to it, where he can put his hands on them. So I think that's true. Next, I want to talk about word studies and Greek aids, Hebrew aids, and that type of thing. And I haven't mentioned these, but there's A.T. Robertson has a list of books on, and they're called the Word Pictures. I like his. There's a fellow by the name of Woost. It looks like West, but anyway. And there's Vincent. That's the way I spelled it. And then there's Vincent's and word studies too. Out of the three, I like A.T. Robertson's, and I use his the most. I have Vincent's and I have Woost also. A.T. Robertson seems to give me more information when I want that information. I mentioned this earlier too, but I want to mention again, Greek interlinear. And that's where you have the Greek language, and then you have the English underneath it. Now, understand something. When we're talking about from Greek, and your New Testament was written in Koine Greek, and there is not then a word-for-word translation. It's just impossible to do. It wouldn't make any sense if you did do that. But you need to be able to study that. To me, that helps you, whether you don't have to go into all of this when you're preaching, but it helps you have a better understanding of what you're doing when you're preaching. I mentioned one. I didn't mention another one. Under the dictionaries, atlases, and concordance, I just saw this. There's some encyclopedias, books. I know that International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. There may be some others, but that's the one that I was thinking. International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. Be abbreviated ISBE. International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. So if you see ISBE in somebody's notes, that's what they have reference to. And it will give you a good idea of a certain topic. If you're studying the high priest, it might even give you a picture of the priestly garments that the high priest had to wear. Visualize then those things. Help you with those. How much is an ephah? How much, all of this. It'll explain those things to you and help you then understand those things. So let me drop down to word studies. I think you need to have a Greek New Testament in your library. I have at least one copy in my library. But then you need how to read Greek. You need a book on how to read Greek. You may take a course. I know Georgia School of Preaching offers a Greek course. I don't think they're offering yet Hebrew. I've never had Hebrew. I've just had Greek. But those courses would be good then. All right, next I want to talk about introductions. Now, there are books that will introduce both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what they do is they give you an overall viewpoint of the book. And I'm talking about the Old Testament or the New Testament. They may give you the history of the Old Testament or the New Testament. They may go back, and I know one that I have. I think most of them do. Go book by book and give you a little information about every book. That's what an introduction does. It doesn't go in depth. It tells you maybe the date, the author, whether it is inspired or how they, the question of inspiration and that type of thing, when that began. So an introduction, like I said, Dixon Bibles had a good introduction at the beginning of them. Or at the end of it. I forgot where it is, but there was a good introduction to each book of the Bible. But there are books that do that. There's introduction to the New Testament, introduction to the Old Testament. Thiessen was one that was good. Now, I think it's out of print now, but it was a good book. There may be other books and when I'm saying other books, what I'm talking about now is books that give you an introduction to each book of the Bible. And I would look at those. Those are good to have. When you discuss that book and know something about that book, you may be giving in your sermon, you may need to give an overall viewpoint. So they would help you understanding those things. So an introduction then. Somehow, some way, have an introduction, Old Testament, New Testament, but then also have maybe of each book, Unger's Handbook. I think that's what it's called. Unger's Handbook is one that will give you an introduction. It's usually not very expensive, usually not very big, and that type of thing. So Then there's a systematic theology. No, this is a different title. Systematic theology. What do I mean by systematic theology? What is systematic? Okay, a logical
direction.
Okay. Brother Rex Turner Sr. has a book called Systematic Theology. It's a 1-volume book. Also, Horns is a multi-volume book on systematic theology. They'll tell you things, and you'll learn some things from them, like sacerdotal and that type of thing. Well, he talks about the sacerdotal would be sacrifices. So he talks about the sacrifices. Although this is not considered a systematic theology, Robert Milligan has a scheme of redemption. And I would put it either under introduction, a general type introduction, or under a systematic theology, because he talks about those type of things too. So some way to give you some in-depth study.
Is there a book on types and anti-types?
Yes.
Would that fall under this sort of thing?
Either that or under hermeneutics. Okay. And I have that. I have types and shadows. I have that under one section. And then I have the names of Jesus or some of the things, the symbol, and I have that under another section. Well, I'm thinking when I saw that today, I thought, those really need to be under the same subclass. Okay. Whether it's preaching, that type of thing. So, yeah, that's a good question.
Cindy Collins did a workbook for DEB,
Yeah,
not this past year. Here we went
yeah,
to PTC on types and
and types.
and
Yes,
it was really
yes. Judy was saying, I don't know if you could hear what she said, but there was Cindy Colley did one on types and anti-types. It's a workbook. Gaddis Roy did one on types and anti-types. And I have another one that's about yay thick on types and anti-types too. You have to be careful with some books, with any book, because sometimes these types and anti-types, like when you study the parables, they'll try to make
every word.
everything in there mean something, and you really stretch. And sometimes the types and anti-types, and I'm thinking, wow, they really stretched that. Now, Joseph is a type of Christ. I can understand that. Moses is a type of Christ. And Joshua and those, yeah. And so I understand that. Types, and there are types. The book of Hebrews talks about shadows and the very image of those things can never, which those sacrifices are. So there is the types.
I was thinking about like Israel is the church is God's Israel.
Yes.
Today, the temple and the holy place and the most holy place and how it represents heaven and church. And
Yeah.
those sort of things. It's very interesting to me. I don't base my faith on it, but I find it interesting.
What is today?
28.
All right. So systematic theology, and we talked about some of those other books. All right. Next, I have church history. That covers a wide range of things. Could start about the prophecy of the church in the Bible, the establishment of the church in the New Testament, the falling away in Acts. Well, you could start with Acts 2, the establishment of the church, and then Acts chapter 20 and verse Acts chapter 20, 17 through 32 talks about there's going to be a falling away. Really, that's like verse 29. Through there talks about there's going to be a falling away. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about a falling away. And so we need to know that falling away. How did the falling away happen? The institution then of the elders, how that translated into the Pope, and then progressed into the Catholic Church. Then you had the Reformation movement. Then you had the Restoration movement. Those type of things, you need to know some history of the church. And again, that will make your preaching more interesting when you know those things. You don't, and I've heard sermons on the Restoration, but it was hard to do in 45, 50 minutes, an hour or so, something like that. But it can be done. I don't necessarily recommend it, but anyway, there's the history of the church. I would maybe take the history of the church in the Bible and deal with some things there. But you need to have some books. You need to have some help then with the history of the church, or you got to know these things. Then I talk about next full sets of commentary. Some people are saying, no, you don't need full sets. Some people saying, yeah, get the whole, yeah. Barnes Notes, Adam Clark, Matthew Henry, pulpit commentary. These are some old ones, and I still think they're pretty basic and they're pretty good. So you can get the whole sets. There's some other ones that put out two. Most of these, Adam Clark, Matthew Henry, and pulpit commentary, I think are public domain.
Clark and Henry, I have.
Yes.
Barnes also.
Yes. And there's some of these books that are public domain, which means they are free online. And so you can use them. There's also one book commentaries. Now, I find that the one book commentary may give me some good general ideas, but they won't give me, when I'm having problems with a specific passage, they don't help much. I'm not saying that they are not good, but they are good.
When you say one book, you mean like so-and-so wrote a book on John?
No. I'm going to give that next, but this is one book is a whole commentary on the whole Bible. Sidlow, the school recommends him sometimes. Explore the Book is the name of his, and it's good, but when I'm looking for help on a passage, it's not going to give me much help. Okay, but it goes back to the introductions. To me, I would think more of it, but it's considered a one book commentary on the whole Bible. So that's what I'm talking about. There are several of those. Okay. I might put those in with the introduction because it's going to be more of an introduction type thing, or a history of the church even. And then partial sets, and I put partial sets because sometimes some in a set are good and some are not. Judy asked about some books. There are some books like on James, or I saw one recently on James, and there's some on John that are standalone. There's some on Genesis that are standalone books, just commentaries on those.
That's under partial set?
Yes, and I put those under partial set. Edward Jones did one on Genesis. There's others. Show Us the Father. W.T. Hamilton did one on that, and it's just on the book of John. Homer Haley did some on like the minor prophets, Revelation and Isaiah. So there, and I put those, my idea was those are under partial sets, although they're standalone on that one book. Seems like somebody else did one on that too. But there are other, there was a young, and I forgot what his first name was, but young, and he did some work on Isaiah and maybe some other stuff that's really good. So those are commentaries. Next, I have listed as lectureship books. Now, lectureship, there are some of the lectureships that I have complete a set of lectureship books. Memphis School of Preaching, the one out in church or Denton lectureship, I have all of those too. There's others, Freed Hardeman College, a lot of the colleges have a lectureship. I may not buy all of those. Getwell has a lectureship, and some of those are pretty good books. But if I needed help, there's some of those books that are really good. I believe, and this is my own personal opinion about that you're going to see a lectureship book, preachers at their best, because preachers are preaching to preachers. And they're going to then really study, have that passage down, and know that book or that passage. And so in those lectureship books, you can get all of the things that we've talked about before. You can get many of them have an introduction, have an outline to this book and what, each section of the book and that type of thing. So there are lots of them. I have lots of lectureship books, and they're good books. I use them like a commentary. That's really, you could put them under commentaries, but I have them listed separately. Next, I have sermon outlines. And the reason I have a whole section of sermon outlines, I like sermon outlines. And the reason I do is because if I'm needing, number one, an idea, if I want to preach on Matthew, and that's what I want to do on, and I want to preach maybe one sermon out of each chapter of the book of Matthew, that's 28 sermons. So I may need some help, okay? I may go through there and, I got part of this one. I need some, maybe on one point, I need some help. So I like sermon outlines to help me through some difficult times. I use other books. Matthew Henry is a good one to help during those times. And I've mentioned that. To me, Matthew Henry gives you some pointers. He's not necessarily a concise commentary, but he'll give you some pointers about passages, and they're very good on those things. So I have lots of sermon outline books. When we were on our honeymoon, we went to a bookstore, and there was 5 volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I thought this was good stuff, and so I bought them. Last name by Campbell. I don't even know if they're in print or not, but it was some good stuff. So sermon outlines. The next one I have is debates. I was always told when I was in school to buy all the debates that you can. The reason is it will help you think, and it will clarify your thinking. And it really has helped me in my preaching, deal with certain topics and certain situations. I was preaching, and there was a oneness fellow that was on the radio, and so I found a debate on the oneness issue, and it really helped me. And I put some things up at that time on the overhead, and it really helped that congregation to understand some things. And the fellow was charismatic in his delivery, and the people were following him not because he had the truth, but because he was charismatic. And we got to be careful of that. But there's the debates, and you can find debates on just about every issue. Alexander Campbell did some debates on the very issues of evidences, atheism, and that type of thing. And that would have been back in the early, well, I say early, but that would have been in the 1800s. So these topics, a lot of times that we're dealing with now, have been dealt with before. And so how to think about those things, how to develop your thinking, but also how to combat those points. I've done very well in debates. I have a whole section of debate books. So I think debates are, next I have evidences. I had to when I was in school, we had like 2 courses on evidences, and it caused me to appreciate why, we have external evidences and we have internal evidences. External, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. You can take these animals that God has created and the very essence of these animals and some of these animals and what they can do and how they can do those things. Why the hummingbird then flies south, and how the scientists are finding out things, and they're still finding out things. So here's the Christian evidences, and I think that will help you undergird your faith in the Bible from the external aspect, but also from the internal. The Bible then is our source of authority in matters of religion. The Bible then is without fault. Some people will say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Well, here's some books then. Alleged discrepancies in the Bible. And so there are some books on evidences. Some of this that happened even in, of course, my lifetime, St. Helen, out in Washington, and some of the things that have taken place that they're still finding out has helped us with evolution and that type of thing. There's some books then, and some people have found some things, and you need to, this will help you. The dinosaur and human prints all in one aspect of it. There's some of that's just fascinating. I know it's online, but some of these things to me, I've got to have a hard copy of those things. So there's evidences. I like also biographies. I just like biographies of great men. I've got one on James Garfield, President of the United States. Yes, well, yes. And so I've got, most of mine are on members of the church. Some of them are not. Majority of them are. J.D. Tant, the Texas preacher. There's N.B. Hardeman. Some of these books are good. I'm telling you, they show us the hardship. Some of these older preachers and what they went through to preach, the financial hardships and the persecution that they went through. And it helps us then in our preaching and our teaching. So I like biographies. I've read them. I've reread them from time to time. Next, I have hermeneutics. There's a class on hermeneutics offered this quarter, or this semester, excuse me. This is the science and interpretation of the Scripture. And so we need to know how to do that. There are books then that will help you how to read the Bible for all it's worth. There is a book called Hermeneutics that I think is still in print. It was called Dungan, D-U-N-G-A-N, I think is his name. Oh, bless your heart. Deal with it. An interpretation of the Scriptures. How to interpret the Bible. It deals with types and antitypes. It deals with all the symbolic language. It deals with parables and similes and similitudes, the figures of speech and how they're used, sarcasm, and it deals with those. So there's books then that will help you with that. Another one that I think is important is archaeology. And again, this could fall under evidences, and I think I'm missing this book too, but one of my textbooks that I had is out of print. I couldn't find it today. But there's other books on archaeology, and they help us then not only go through our Bibles, but they will help us then have that faith in our Bible. Here's archaeology then proving the Bible. So I would have some of those too. Then I have, and Judy asked about this, books on preaching. Now there are on how to preach. I have some on how to preach without notes. Recommended a couple of them for this class. But there's on how to deliver. I think we need to be ever learning on that. And underneath this, I put types and shadows. So that's where I put my types and shadows, under the preaching. Another one that I have is on counseling. I have some book on counseling. Whether you're a professional counselor or not, doesn't make any difference. There are some things you need to know about counseling. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's some other issues, drinking and drugs and all of this. But there are some things that you need to be reading about to help you help other people when they're going through those things. What to say, what not to say is so important. So you need some books on counseling. And then you need some books on problems within the church. Okay, what are some of the problems within the church? Well, there's marriage, divorce, and remarriage. You need to find out where you are on that. Yeah, there's worship. There's, classrooms. There's, people that are against located preachers. These are debates, but these are some things that we need to be dealing with. There's problems, when people get upset. And so I have that close with counseling, and I think there's some time that we need to talk about those things. All right. Next, then, in the next hour, we're going to get into some of the computer programs, and I want to talk about some of those because, there's reasons why, and we'll talk about that the next hour. So let's take a break. Yep, we are. Hey, do you want anything?
Yeah. I'm gonna come.
Okay.
I'll be out in a minute. I wanna get a piece of paper out. The Blackwater Macedonia is in Nauvoo.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Which is right outside of Jasper. I don't know if it's in Walker County or not.
It is. That's what it says. It's a big old building.
David said that somebody told me that they had built a new building.
Their address is Jasper. If I will find.
They had built a new building. We went in there, worshiped with them. Jerry Martin was going out west, which was last Sunday or something like that. So we all went from camp.
They meet the same time we do. Well, they meet 9:30, 10:30, and then 5.
And man, it was July. They could have hung that up.
Really? Mm. They don't have their leadership listed.
Really?
But they have an app. Everybody's got an app. don't they? Here. I'm kind of glad Garrett doesn't have a home game next Friday.
When?
Next Friday, the 7th.
Yeah. What's he got?
They're going to Monroe.
Oh,
Sometimes I'm thinking maybe the next 2 games are, see, his first 2 games are away, considered away.
yeah. But they're
And
really
then
close.
this one's at home.
Yeah.
Let me see. Oh, I have got to send that to my brother.
What?
That picture of the lawnmower.
On the air conditioner. A lot of people only knew. You know, since me and you, of course, it's about time to start. We could have walked on about 3.
That is so mean.
you ready?
Yeah. Carol, yep.
All right. Let's talk about computer programs then. What we can do with our computer. Let me tell you something about computers. When I got my first computer, I really didn't realize, and I'm just talking about there were no Bible programs back then. This was like 1986 when I bought my first computer. But it helped me so much in writing. It helped me so much and be so much more effective in that it was really, I mean, it was, yeah, we went from muleback to jet planes, just, and I was really amazed at how much that helped. Then, and when I started Bible programs and I started using Bible programs, it made it so much faster and you could be so much more efficient. Instead of going to your library, you'd open up this app and, of course, they weren't called apps. It wasn't called apps back then. But anyway, that's what it was. And so you could, look at it and pull it up, and there it was. The concordances, you could do just so much quicker. Now, you can have all these books that we've talked about, and so many of these books on your computer, and you can search them so much quicker. I still like the hard copy, but this is so much quicker. You don't have to go and pull them off the library and stack them, out of your library and stack them up there and read them and then put them back, make your notes and all this kind of stuff. You got them right there, and you can, have 3 or 4 open at the same time. You can study these things and go back and forth on those things and do so much. It's so much quicker. Then I also found that if you ever move, and you got to move all your books, when you've got all these books on your computer, it saves you a lot of space and a lot of weight, and it just really is a lot easier. So I understand. Now we're going to talk about a lot of different Bible programs this evening. Number one we want to talk about is Olive Tree. They have a free, and I use the free app. They also have books that you can buy and that type of thing. I use Olive Tree mostly for the search. I can go to my app, open that app up, and then I can do my search. There's other things I'm sure it can be used for, but that's what I usually main for. I also have on my iPad Pocket Sword, and let me get it for a second because I want to tell you some things about Pocket Sword. Can you load Pocket Sword on your app? Okay, this is an Apple product, really, is what this is. I don't know if you can get it on Droids or not, but I have it on my iPad. And some of the stuff that we bought in others and we've been talking about, it's free on this app. Okay, I have King James with it, and under King James, on my King James that I have with it, I have Strong's numbers. So every word has a Strong's numbers to it. You also have the American Standard and the New English translations. There may be some others. I need to look at this. I haven't downloaded modules, but they have those modules that you can download. And commentaries, they have these commentaries listed. Adam Clark, now this is all free. Jamieson, Fawcett, Brown, Kyle and DeLitch, which is, that's Old Testament. Keil and A-N-D, DELITZ SCH. Well, that is really an authoritative. Well, it is also
This is Old Testament.
Old Testament only, and it's very good in the Old Testament. It's considered scholarly. It's considered some of the best work then. Then I have Matthew Henry Complete Commentary. I have Matthew Henry Concise Commentary. I have Net Notes, the People's New Testament, Robertson's Word Pictures,
You said People's New Testament.
the People's New Testament. And then I had the Fourfold Commentary put out by McGarvey.
Is that
Fourfold,
four like the number? Four?
yes, F-O-U-R, fold, F-O-L-D, Gospel and Commentary.
Is that right?
McGarvey. Now that's the last time that I updated mine. Then in dictionaries, I have Robinson's, and this is, I don't know exactly what that one is. I haven't looked at it that much. I have Smith's, S-M-I-T-H. Strong's, both Greek and Hebrew. Under this, I have Thompson Chain Reference.
Under dictionary?
I don't know why they put it under that. I don't guess they had it any place else to put it. It had Vine's Expository Dictionary. And I have Webster's. Now that's just the ones I've downloaded. There may be some others. You can,
I need you to help me with that, 'cause I don't have all those modules.
okay.
I have Strong's by itself.
All right. On this, under the bottom of it, you have downloads. We'll help you with it. And underneath that will give you the.
Because I have like Barnes and all this separate. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I don't have Barnes. I thought I did.
I have Barnes
Under your
separate. I have Barnes commentary, Albert Barnes notes.
but it's not with the pocket sword. Okay. Okay.
I think I do have it on Pocket Sword too, but I want it
What-
individually.
Wait a
as
minute.
little
Yes, I do
different.
have Barnes notes on, and I have Clark.
No, I have Matthew Henry Pocket Sword, but I have Matthew Henry separate also.
Well, I have Barnes notes on that too.
No, I don't. I don't have Matthew Henry separate because I had it with Pocket Sword, but I've got
Yeah.
Barnes and Adam Clark
Yes.
and Strong's Concordance and Vine's Dictionary,
Yes.
all separate.
But those are that pocket sword is free. All of that stuff that I talked is free on that. Some people use eSword. I don't know how much eSword is free. Some of it is. Then they have modules that you can download and they cost you something. I think College Press
Is that under eSword?
was with eSword. I think that's right. So eSword's and I don't know enough about eSword, but I know they have some Greek studies to help you with that. Most of these Bible programs we're going to have some way to study the Greek or the Hebrew. It may be then, and a lot depends on price, how much you want to pay. They have a basic Bible program, then they step up and step up and step up and step up. Talk about eSword Logos, L-O-G-O-S. That's one that I know you can buy in different stages. I've had mine for a long time. Did I have it before we married?
I don't know. I know you had two.
It is very expensive, and I mean you can go up in $10,000, maybe more, $15,000 for some of their. If you get their total package, I just
You get like a Greek Interlinear Bible too from the App Store for anywhere from 99 cents to $4.
Yeah. So it's there. Logos, like I said, is very expensive. To me, it's hard to use because I'm used to using another Bible program, but it has a Greek study. It has a wonderful Greek study on it, how to use that. It also has apps for your phone and for your iPad, and it has you can do some study on that. When you open it up, it will always go back to the last place that you opened it up to. So you can do that. It has some attributes on it. It has some books that not available on other places, but like I said, they charge for their books. The Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words is a public domain, but they charge for it. So we have Olive Tree, Pocket Sword, eSword, Logos, Accordance. That's an Apple program too. I think it's specifically for Apple. And I think also with Accordance, you can buy different levels of it too. You can get, and I do have a free aspect of Concordance on my phone. I use a PC Study Bible or a Mac Study Bible. I have a PC at home and it's loaded there. I have a Mac that I'm using here, and I have it on my Mac Study Bible too. I use it. That's the one that I like, and it has most of these books that we've talked about in there. And so, and I know you can buy it at different levels. It's not as expensive as Logos. Logos, I think I have silver, and under PC or Mac Study Bible, I have the professional. There may be, and you can buy different books that's not listed. I would go to their website, and you can look at the side by side. You can buy then what you want to. You can upgrade later on those type of things. I'm not for anyone, but I'm telling you. No, there's different codexes though. That'd be under How We Got Our Bible. All right, now there's other ways to build your library, and let me give you some of these. All right, number one, you can ask preachers that you trust, that you like, what books would you recommend? And they're going to recommend a lot of different books. I try to give you subjects, not necessarily books, but subjects that I think you need in your library. You can also look up authors. There's some people like C.S. Lewis. Some people would recommend all of his books. I've never used his book, so I don't know anything about him. Yes, and there's also a lot of people quote him too. Atheism too. So you can look up. The web is a wonderful thing when used correctly. You can look up so much, and I have some sons-in-law that use it probably pretty exclusive for their Bible study, and there's helps that you can get. Kaufman Commentary, I think, is only online now. There are copies, hard copies. I have several hard copies of it, but you can get it online. It doesn't cost you anything to use it online. And I like this too. New is not always better. So what you want to do is find the best book out there on certain subjects, certain commentaries, certain whatever. So you want to find the best, whether it's old or whether it's new. Just because it's new. I know one college that I know of will only use books no less than 5 years old. And I think that's a mistake. I really do. So buy the best that you can buy. Same thing with the Bible program, but buy the best books that you can on certain subjects. All right. Also, when you're looking, check the footnotes. I like footnotes. I know different. There are different methods of footnoting it. Some of them have the complete information at the bottom of the page. Some of it have just a partial, and then you go back to the bibliography and look for it. So you check the footnotes, you check the bibliographies. We already talked about that. Some books by certain authors you buy. I don't care who they are. There's some men out there that if they come out with a new book, I'm going to buy it. And then some of our brotherhood, that doesn't make any difference. I'm going to buy it because it's worth buying. Now, in all of these, I want you to know something, and I'm not recommending wholesale all of these books because they may disagree with me. Okay. But you need to respect what their viewpoint is. You may disagree with it. You may have biblical reasons why you disagree with it. But that doesn't mean that you throw out everything. That's like Barnes Notes and A.T. Robertson's and some of these people, Matthew Henry. There's error in there that I'll disagree with them. But there's some good points to them too. So just because I disagree with somebody doesn't mean that I'm not going to buy the book. So respect their viewpoints, even though you disagree with them. Also, look at a book. You may look at it, and here's a book that, no, skim through it. One fellow that I was looking at where I got this idea from online, he said, date it before you marry it. And I thought, well, okay. So you look at it, you skim it, you maybe read a couple of chapters in it, or whether you want to see it, look at the bibliography, look at whatever, and then you decide whether you want to buy it or not. You may go to the library that may have it on there. There may be other ways. Yeah, other ways to do that. So you can look at that too. Also, used books. Don't ever refuse used books. I've got one on the book of Romans that to me, it's a used book, and I bought it used, but the notes in the margin that the whoever I bought it from, the notes that they made while they were going through the class are just as important as the text itself. And so I like that book. So used books. You need to watch used books though. I have one by on the Holy Spirit. And I have 2 copies of it. And somebody asked me, why do you have 2 copies? Well, I bought the first copy and I made some notes in it. And then he came out and added some information to it on the second one. So I bought the second one so I could have that extra information on it because it's good information. But I have 2 books by the same author. And they're different editions of that. And the reason I did that is because of that new information. So used books, but understand sometimes when you buy used books, it doesn't have the information, all the information that's been updated. Did I mention ebooks, public domain books that are out there? And we talked about the Barnes Notes, Matthew Henry, Adam Clark, some of these old standards. I think even Pulpit Commentary, maybe even public domain. So these are good books. I wouldn't throw them out. They may not be some people may not consider them scholarly, but I would look at them. Found a place today, and I want to look more at it. It's called Preacher's Library, and it will catalog all your books. And I'm thinking and if you start, when you got a few books, if you'll start and keep that up to date, that'd be great. For me, it'd probably take 2 or 3 days to get all my books listed in it. But it's a good way. It catalogs them too. And then also listen to good preaching. iPods, or whatever they're called. Podcast. Ways to listen to some folks are putting old sermons old preachers. They had recordings of these, and they're taking these recordings and putting them on their these are good. That's some good stuff. And so And some of those I've preached. I've taken my notes and taken notes while they were preaching. The good thing about it is if I missed a point, I can stop it, redo it a little bit. I don't know, you don't rewind it, but anyway. And then,
Go back to the beginning.
yeah, well, maybe not all the way back to the beginning, but several minutes passed or several seconds passed, and, listen to it again and then write that down and keep on going. So I'm a firm believer in listening to good preaching. There's some good ideas out there. And that's what we're trying to talk about here, is developing then sermons. And where do we get our ideas? Where do we get our helps? When you get into a struggle on your sermons, where are you going to go for help? And there's lots of places online. Don't forget to go to online places. And
I think
those.
developing an network would be good too, other preachers that
Yes.
friends that, or maybe people you meet at leadership,
Yes.
older preachers you can call on. They love to have you call.
I was on a preacher's list that did that very thing. We shared sermons and ideas, illustrations, and that type of thing. So yes, there's some of those out there too. I know that polishing the pulpit, one of the sessions that I truly enjoyed was in the evening, when this was a long time ago, and preachers would just sit around. Everybody would participate. Believe it or not, this is when there was the total that could come was 50. And so what they would do would be having, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 of us, maybe not that many of us, but we would sit around and somebody would give one sermon outline and somebody else would give another sermon outline. It may not be a complete sermon outline and a detailed, well, let me rephrase that. It may not be a detailed sermon outline, but it would be an outline, maybe from the margins that we wrote and we got from other preachers. So there are ideas like that you can get and help. And that's what I'm trying to give you in this class, is when you get bogged down, I need some help. Where do I go for help? And I've had problems with that. And so I'm trying to help, younger folks. Where do we go? Where do I get some ideas? Where do I get these things for preaching to help on this? So we have about 20 minutes left. And I would ask if there's any questions, but there's only one person in the class here visibly. So do you have any questions? No, dear. Okay. So let me give you a sermon idea, and I'm going to preach this Sunday. So this will be on probably Monday of next week. My sermon outline will be on graychurchofchrist.com, not .org, but .com, okay? And so my text is going to be from John chapter 5 and verse number 38. That passage says, "Search the scriptures, for in them you think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me." So we look at the word testify then, and here are words then. This is the book. The scriptures are the books that show that Jesus is the Christ, through prophecy in the Old Testament, through actual coming of the Messiah in the New Testament, and then that fulfillment of those prophecies in the New Testament. So we look at the word testify, and we also look at the word scriptures, and I think that is both inclusive of the Old Testament and the New Testament. When Jesus used it, though, it was talking specifically about the Old Testament, and he told them to search the scriptures. So when we search then the Bible, the Old Testament, can we find Jesus in every book? And I think we can. When we start with Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, here is then the unfolding. Here was man's sin, Genesis chapter 3. Eve partook of that fruit, and then she gave to her husband. He partook of that fruit. And here was the problem. Man was separated from God now. And God had to do something to reconcile both man and God back together. And that's beginning in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. So you take that and you can read that, and, there's where the beginning is. Then we go to Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. In thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. We find from Galatians chapter 3 that that's speaking of Christ. Matter of fact, Paul makes the idea there, the seed singular, not as seed plural, but of seed singular. So there is the idea of using just the S, the plural singular type thing, and making arguments from that. So we look at those passages. There are other New Testament passages. I don't have this one listed, but I'm thinking about adding this in Genesis chapter 49. When Jacob then is telling about those 12 tribes and what would take place. And then it says there that the scepter shall not depart from Judah till Shiloh come. And so there is the prophecy of the kingship in Judah. Now that, yes. And well, there's more to that too. There's some of your types and shadows that goes into that, in the background, the interesting study of that. But the scepter then talks about the kingship. Now, we haven't got there yet, but when we talk about 1 Samuel chapter 8, the king's going to begin with Saul, which was from the tribe of Benjamin. So we've got to get it from the tribe of Benjamin to the tribe of Judah, and then to the tribe of David, well, to the house of David. So we'll see that as that unfolds. But there's the book of Genesis then, and what's taking place. And we see that Jesus then is manifested, is shown then in the book of Genesis. Exodus then, we find in Exodus chapter 12, the Passover lamb is being sacrificed. There's the 10 plagues that are taking place. And they are against then the 10 major gods of the Egyptians. Not only did that happen, but how that God had destroyed Egypt. And Israel then spoiled them. And I think that's what the word is used there, especially with the death of the firstborn, that he would spoil them. Then in Exodus chapter 12, we find the Passover being instituted. And you need to understand and read that section about the Passover. But we find that John introduces Jesus in John chapter 1, verse 29, I believe it is. He says, behold, the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. That's the purpose of the Paschal Lamb, putting the blood then on the doorpost, and then the death would pass over that household. Then in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7, it says that Christ is our Passover. You can't explain 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7 without going back to Exodus chapter 12. So there's the Christ then in the book of Exodus. Leviticus then is our next book. In Leviticus chapter 8, we find the high priest. We need to run then to the book of Hebrews and study about that Christ is our high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Go back to Genesis then, and you could study about Melchizedek and who he was. But he had neither father, or he had neither beginning nor ending. We know that he was born, but we don't have any record of his birth or his death. He just appeared on the scene there with Abraham. But he is a high priest. He was a high priest of God, the city of Salem. And so here is Christ then, a priest, a high priest, after the order of Melchizedek. And then we also find in Hebrews chapter 7 that the having the priesthood be changed, there also of necessity had to be a change of the law. And so here is Christ mentioned then in that book of Leviticus. I think there are other things that you could talk about, the sacrifices, but that's one and good one right there in the book of Leviticus. Then from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. In the book of Numbers, we find that Numbers chapter 20, that Moses was to speak to the rock, but he struck the rock. And there are some types. Judy mentioned this then too, and types and shadows there. The rock, or the Christ, the rock, the Christ, would not be struck twice, just once. And he was to speak to the rock. So there's some misapplication then, some misuse then that Moses did. And that's why Moses was condemned and did not go into the land of Canaan because of that. But there has reference then to Christ and his sacrifices that he went through for Christ. So we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Then we have Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy 18, I think it's verse 18, we find here is Moses says that there's going to be a prophet that rises up likened unto me, and him ye shall hear. And so we find in Acts chapter 3 that has reference to Christ. So here is then the Christ mentioned in that book too. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. In the book of Joshua, we find that Joshua comes up on a scene, and there is the captain of the Lord's host. And when Joshua is there, he is told to take off his shoes, for on the ground that he's standing is holy ground. You got to go back and understand in Exodus chapter 3 that when Moses was standing then in the presence of God, there was that burning bush. He's told to take off his shoes, for where he was standing was holy ground. So Joshua is standing then with the Lord, the captain of the Lord's host, and that's holy ground where he's standing. That is the Christ then. He is the captain of our salvation. Hebrews chapter 6 mentions that. So here is then the Christ in the book of where were we? Joshua. Judges. All the judges really are a type of Christ because they delivered Israel out of captivity, out of sin. And here is Christ. So we could use that one in that aspect. Joshua, Judges. Then Ruth. What's the importance of Ruth then, and in the lineage of Jesus Christ, or in the life of Jesus Christ? That's right. But there's some other significance in that. When we study Matthew chapter 1, you'll find there's a mention of women in Matthew chapter 1, which is really significant in the fact that the women were not usually mentioned in genealogies, but here is Ruth that's mentioned. Now, Ruth is also a Gentile, and she's in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Yes, but she's still a Gentile. So there are Gentiles in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Also, she is then the Rahab the harlot was. But she's in the lineage of Jesus Christ. You could go back to the book of Joshua and talk about that too. But we have the opportunity because of Ruth, and Ruth chapter 4 mentions then that lineage of what David was. There's some significance too about this when David then was being chased by Saul and how he went down to the Moabites and stayed with his grandparents or some relatives there in the Moabite people. Very interesting when you study that and get to know that. So here is Christ then in the book of Ruth. Then we come to, what's after Ruth? Verse, Ezra. Go to the front of your Bible, just right there to the front of it. Notice your Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. 1st and 2nd Samuel.
Yes, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd
Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. In this, I clumped all those books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles all together. But you could separate them. 1st Kings chapter 8, there's a king then. Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You could say that for Chronicles also. But here is then Christ in that. In especially in 2nd Samuel chapter 7, we find that there's the prophecy. And here is then the kingdom being transferred over to David and the tribe of Judah. And in 2 Samuel chapter 7, you find that God is talking to David about what's going to happen in the future. And David understood that that was speaking of the Christ. And he said, you spoke of the long time to come. So 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Solomon becomes king. Here's the line then that's going through the king. And then that's right, the temple comes into in Jerusalem. And that's significant because of the church. But we're focusing then on Christ. Christ is the head of the church, though, and those type of things. In Chronicles, we find the lineage of Jesus Christ, and we find that that is important because nobody ever questioned the lineage of Jesus Christ coming into this world. He is, in Matthew chapter 1, the son of Adam, the son of Abraham, the son of David, or he's the father, however it lists it there. So there's 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra. Here is the providence of God working in the life of men. And who knows whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this. Ezra. Okay, I got my Ezra. Here is a man who prepared his heart to serve the Lord and rebuilt the walls. Yes, Ezra. Nehemiah, there was the mind to work, rebuilding the wall. Yes, and also in the plains Ezra did. Rebuilt the temple. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. That would be the providence of God. Esther, Job. I know that my Redeemer lives. Going back to patriarchal age. Then we find Job, Psalms. You find the 23rd Psalm. And I'm going to make mention specifically of Psalms 129. That is where they plowed. It says that the plowers plowed upon my back. I find many prophecies in the book of Psalms about Christ and who he was, and all of those things. So we have Psalms, Proverbs. Forget not the law of thy mother and the law of thy father. And there could be some others. I forget what what point I'm making from Proverbs. Yes. What's after Proverbs? Ecclesiastes. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, to fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Song of Solomon's about marriage. Go to Ephesians chapter 5 and talks about marriage there and how the husband of one wife. And Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9, we mentioned the problems of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Matthew 19:9 settles that. One man, one woman for life, except for the cause of fornication. And we find people today getting divorced for every cause and all that kind of stuff. The Bible says that that's not true. It's not good. So we need one man for one woman for life. So there's a Song of Solomon. After that, then we come into, is it Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel? Yes, Isaiah. That's Isaiah 53. Well, Isaiah 7:14 and 7:14, 9:6, and Isaiah 53, all pointing to Christ there in the book of Isaiah. Spend a lot of time with Isaiah 53. The suffering Savior is mentioned there. So that's Isaiah. Jeremiah then. Jeremiah 31 talks about a new law will be given, quoted in Hebrews chapter 8. And they shall all be taught of God, every man then, that hath known the Father cometh unto him. So there is then the book of Jeremiah. Lamentations, I missed Lamentations. I don't have anything for Lamentations, even in my sermon. I understand that. There's the weeping prophet. Yes, that would be good there. God's mercies are new every morning. Isn't that Lamentations 3?
Yeah.
Then in Ezekiel chapter 3, we find that there are the watchmen.
It's 3. In fact, 22, 23, 24, and 25. So good, because it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not.
Yeah.
They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good,
All right.
That's so uplifting.
Yeah, that is. So there's Lamentations, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel. We mentioned Ezekiel. What's after Ezekiel? Daniel. Um, Daniel chapter 7, it talks about coming to the Ancient of Days. There's other passages then that talk about in Daniel.
The history right there.
Yes.
The four
World powers and that type of thing. Daniel chapter
Right.
2.
You got Hosea.
Hosea, yes,
Bless
there's,
Hosea's heart. He hadn't married
yes. And some of this I'm doing from memory, and I don't remember Hosea, but that would be there. There's some pointers then to Christ in Hosea. Joel chapter 2 is the prophecy of the Spirit then. Hosea, Joel, Amos. I forgot what Amos is about too.
Amos says in chapter 6.
Woe unto them that
Woe
give.
unto them that use new
Yep.
spiritual
Yeah.
instruments.
And
Obadiah,
Amos,
Jonah.
Obadiah, I don't have one at all for, no, it's no, but yeah, Obadiah, because but some have it as a pride. Pride goes before destruction, the Holy Spirit before a fall. And we need to submit then to God. Obadiah, what's after Obadiah?
Obadiah, Jonah.
Jonah, the preaching to the Gentiles.
Now he
there.
got his courage for the whole town.
Yeah. So there was Jonah.
Funny. And the whale.
And then what's next?
Micah.
Micah 5 and verse 2, prophesied where Christ would be born. Nahum, I've forgotten what Nahum is also. Habakkuk 2, not 2:15, but 2:5 talks about Christ. I think it's a Habakkuk 2:5. Then, all right. Zephaniah 13, it's talking about the Christ in that chapter, pointing to Christ.
Yeah.
Then, sold, I think it also mentions in there that he sold for 30 pieces of silver. Forgotten what Haggai. I've got to.
Zechariah.
Yeah.
And
Malachi chapter 4. I remember this one. Malachi chapter 4 talks about the last two verses talk about preparing the way.
Well, there's a good lesson on giving.
I understand that too.
Give to your governors.
But we're talking about them focusing the attention on the Christ. So here is then
Christ in each chapter.
yeah, Christ in the Malachi chapter 4, ending the book of the prophecy of preparing the way for the Messiah. So there's some thoughts there that here is Jesus then, and what he says, search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me. So here is then those passages. And I hope that helps you then and gives you some encouragement in doing some passage of study and those type of things for that. You have any questions? I'll ask you again if you have any questions. Okay. We will take up then. Let's see. This is the 20th. Sermons must be prepared. Well, I got ahead of myself. So we may go back and talk about sermons must be prepared. And talk about some things then. What shall I preach, and do some things there on those passages that we're talking about that. So, and I didn't get into all of this also, but and I thought I had that visual aids on the computer. We'll talk about that too when it's time. So I got ahead of myself by a week. So we'll go back and talk about these things. I don't know why I did that. Sermons must be prepared. And I'm going to talk about that. We've got to sit down and prepare our sermons. Okay. And I like what he says in there. I read that. And he doesn't say you got to let them simmer or something, but he uses some words similar to that. Very good stuff. So read that and be ready for next week. All right. And that'll conclude us then for this evening.
That is a house, Jack. 51.